The signal came through on a frequency that hadn't been used in decades. Deep in the mining colonies of the outer solar system, automated listening posts caught the transmission and immediately flagged it as non-human. The message repeated every 30 seconds, growing weaker with each cycle. Within an hour, the data reached the hidden command center buried beneath the surface of Mars. Commander stood in the operations room, watching the alien symbols scroll across the holographic display. His team of linguists had been working for 3 hours straight, piecing together the meaning from context and mathematical patterns. The translation was crude, but the meaning was clear enough. Someone out there was dying and they were begging for help. "It's a distress call," said the lead analyst, her voice tired. "They're calling themselves They say something called the Ravagers is destroying their worlds. They've sent requests to something called the Galactic Coalition, but no help has come. This is a blind broadcast to anyone who might be listening." Read the translated message again. The desperation was obvious even through the alien language. Entire planets were being consumed. Billions of lives were at stake. They had been broadcasting for weeks, maybe months, and no one had answered. He picked up the secure communicator and made the call that would change everything. "Get me Admiral. Tell her it's priority 1. Admiral arrived at the command center within the hour. She was a veteran of 3 decades of service, though most of that service had been preparation for a day that might never come. Humanity had discovered they weren't alone in the universe 50 years ago, when deep space probes had intercepted alien communications. The decision had been made at the highest levels to stay hidden, to watch and learn until Earth was ready to reveal itself. She studied the message in silence, her expression unreadable, knew what she was thinking. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. Humanity was supposed to have another decade, maybe 2, before making contact. Their ships were ready, their weapons were tested, but the plan had always been to reveal themselves on their own terms. "How long until the signal dies completely?" asked. 2 days, maybe 3, replied. "After that, we lose the source coordinates." Nodded slowly. "Prepare a reconnaissance mission. Small, fast, stealthy. I want our best people. We go in, assess the situation, and report back. No engagement unless absolutely necessary." Captain Minu received his orders with the calm professionalism that had earned him command of the Shadow of Terra, humanity's most advanced stealth frigate. He was young for a captain, only 35, but he had trained for this his entire adult life. His crew was small, just 20 people, each one a specialist in their field. Tactical Officer was already running simulations when Minu entered the bridge. She had been with him for 5 years, and they worked together like a single organism. Engineer was in the reactor room, coaxing every bit of power from the experimental drives. Medic was preparing her bay for possible casualties, both human and alien. "We're really doing this," said, not looking up from her console. "First contact." "Not quite," Minu replied. "We're just going to look, stay invisible, gather data, come home." "You believe that?" He didn't answer because they both knew the truth. Humanity didn't do anything halfway. If they were going out there, it was because they intended to make a difference. The Shadow of Terra left the solar system 3 hours later, slipping past the orbital defenses and accelerating to speeds that would have torn apart any conventional spacecraft. The journey would take 2 weeks, traveling through the dark spaces between stars where no one would see them coming. During the voyage, the crew studied everything they could about the aliens had included technical data in their distress call, probably hoping someone would understand their plight better. They were peaceful, had been part of the Galactic Coalition for over 1,000 years, and had never experienced real war. Their weapons were designed for defense only, and even those were outdated. The Ravagers, from what little information existed, were different. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't retreat. They simply appeared in a system and began consuming everything. Ships, stations, planets, nothing survived contact with them. The coalition had sent 3 fleets to stop them. None had returned. Brought coffee to the bridge on the 13th day. "I've been thinking," he said, which was usually the start of something interesting. "If the coalition lost 3 fleets and they've been spacefaring for thousands of years, what makes us think we can do better?" Smiled, "Because they've been at peace for thousands of years. We haven't." It was true, and everyone on the ship knew it. Humanity had only achieved lasting peace 40 years ago, and even that was fragile. For most of human history, war had been constant. Every nation, every tribe, every group had fought someone. Earth had produced warriors because Earth demanded warriors for survival. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and immediately went silent. The shadow of Terra was designed to be invisible, its hull absorbing sensor waves, its emissions masked by clever engineering. They drifted toward the inner planets, watching and listening. What they found was worse than the distress call had suggested. 2 of the 5 worlds were already gone, reduced to stripped husks orbiting their sun. The remaining 3 were under siege. Massive organic ships, if they could be called ships, surrounded the planets like a swarm of insects. They were launching smaller craft toward the surface in a steady stream. Minyu ordered the ship closer, risking detection for better data. Recorded everything, her tactical mind already analyzing patterns and weaknesses. The Ravagers moved in swarms, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. Their ships seemed to be alive, growing and adapting. It was unlike anything in the human military database. On the 3rd planet, they detected a concentration of ships making a desperate stand. Minyu made a decision. "Take us in. Let's see if anyone's home." They approached slowly, broadcasting a simple mathematical sequence to show peaceful intent. A vessel responded, and for the first time in history, humans and aliens spoke to each other. The commander identified himself as, and his confusion was obvious even through the translation software was rapidly building. "You are not Coalition," said. "Where do you come from?" "Far away," Minyu replied carefully. "We received your distress call. We came to help." There was a long pause. "You came from beyond known space to answer a call for help. Why?" Minyu looked at his crew, saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his chest. "Because someone needed to." The conversation was cut short when Ravager scouts detected the unusual transmissions and moved to investigate. The shadow of Terra fled, but not before downloading massive amounts of data from the systems. They had what they needed. As they accelerated out of the system, joined Minyu on the bridge. "We're going back, aren't we, with everything we have?" Minyu nodded, watching the dying worlds shrink in the viewport. "Yeah, we're going back." The shadow of Terra returned to Mars 3 days ahead of schedule, pushing the engines beyond recommended limits. Captain Minyu transmitted his initial report while still 12 hours out, and by the time they docked, Admiral had already assembled the War Council. The briefing room was packed with humanity's military leadership. Generals, admirals, intelligence directors, all watching as presented the tactical analysis. The holographic display showed the Ravager attack patterns in detail, ships moving in coordinated swarms, overwhelming defenders through pure numbers and aggression. "They're predictable," said, manipulating the display to show attack vectors. "They always take the same approach angles. They bunch up when attacking defensive positions. They don't adapt their tactics even when they're taking heavy losses." General leaned forward. "The Coalition couldn't stop them with predictable tactics." "The Coalition doesn't think like we do," Minyu interjected. "From what we saw, their defense doctrine is about preserving resources and minimizing casualties. They retreat when losses reach 15%. The Ravagers just keep coming." Director of Special Operations studied the biological data on her tablet. "What about the creatures themselves? Are they intelligent?" Brought up enhanced scans of captured Ravager. The images showed organisms that were part ship, part creature, a nightmare fusion of technology and flesh. "They're engineered," he explained. "Grown, not built. Each one has basic combat instincts but no real intelligence. They're controlled by something else, some kind of hive consciousness." Medic added her findings. "I analyzed the biological samples our sensors collected. The Ravagers have vulnerabilities. Their organic components can't handle extreme temperature changes. Their nerve clusters are exposed in 3 locations. They heal fast, but certain chemical compounds stop the regeneration process." The council members exchanged glances. Admiral stood, her hands clasped behind her back. "The question before us is simple. Do we intervene? This isn't our fight. We don't know these aliens. We have no obligation to help them." The room fell silent. It was Minu who spoke first. "With respect, Admiral, when has humanity ever needed an obligation to help? They are dying. We have the capability to make a difference. Isn't that enough?" Nodded. "The captain's right. Besides, if we don't stop the Ravagers at the Worlds, what happens when they find Earth? Better to fight them there than here." Allowed herself a small smile. She had expected this response. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its willingness to stand up for others, even at great personal cost. "Then we fight. But we fight smart. Director, I want options for disrupting their hive control. General, start mobilizing the orbital drop corps. We'll need ground forces if we're going to hold territory." Over the next week, the Martian shipyards became a hive of activity. Ships that had been in reserve for years were brought online. Troops who had trained in simulation were issued real weapons and real armor. Supply chains that existed only on paper became reality. Meanwhile, back at the watched the skis with growing despair. The Ravagers were tightening their grip on the remaining planets. Evacuations were, but there was nowhere safe to run. The Coalition had sent messages of support but no actual help. They were discussing the matter in committees while his people died. He was in the command center when the sensors detected something unusual. Ships were appearing at the edge of the system, dozens of them, appearing from faster-than-light travel in precise formation. They weren't Ravager vessels. They weren't Coalition either. The lead ship broadcasted on the same frequency the small vessel had used days before. "Forces, this is Fleet Admiral of the Terran Defense Initiative. We received your distress call. We're here to help. Please transmit defensive coordinates and civilian evacuation points." Felt something he hadn't felt in months. "Hope, Terran, is that what you call yourselves? How many ships do you have?" "Enough," came the reply. "Stand by for coordination protocols." The human fleet moved into position with military precision that impressed even the desperate. They didn't ask for permission or wait for committee approval. They simply began executing a plan that had clearly been prepared in advance. Transport ships moved toward the besieged planets, broadcasting that they were there to evacuate civilians. Warships formed a defensive perimeter, weapons powered and shields raised. And then, to shock, troops began dropping toward the surface in small pods, heading directly for the areas with the heaviest Ravager presence. "What are they doing?" his tactical officer asked in horror. "They're going into the worst fighting on purpose." Watched the displays in fascination. The humans weren't running from the Ravagers. They were charging toward them. On the surface of the second planet, Colonel's drop pod hit the ground hard. The shock absorbers handled most of the impact, but he still felt it in his bones. The pod door blew open, and he was moving before the smoke cleared, rifle up and scanning for targets. Around him, hundreds of other pods were landing, disgorging soldiers who immediately formed up into combat units. Lieutenant's Mechanized Armor Division was already engaging Ravager ground forces, the massive war machines trading fire with bioengineered monsters. "First Human Expeditionary Force, this is. We are on the ground and engaging the enemy. All units execute Plan Delta. Show these things what a death world looks like." Sergeant's shock troops hit a Ravager formation from the flank, using terrain that the aliens had ignored. The Ravagers were used to enemies who fought from defensive positions. They had no experience with forces that used guerrilla tactics, that struck from unexpected angles, that turned the environment itself into a weapon. Corporal set up her rifle on a ruined building 3 kilometers from the main battle. Through her scope, she could see Ravager commanders, larger organisms that seemed to coordinate the smaller ones. She adjusted for wind, distance, and the planet's gravity. Her first shot traveled across the battlefield and struck a commander in its exposed nerve cluster. The creature collapsed, and the dozen Ravagers around it suddenly lost coordination. "Confirmed kill on hostile leader," she reported calmly, moving to next target. The forces watching from their defensive positions couldn't believe what they were seeing. The humans fought with a controlled aggression that seemed impossible. They took casualties but didn't retreat. They ran toward danger instead of away from it. They laughed and shouted encouragement to each other while fighting creatures that had destroyed entire fleets. Finally understood. These Terrans, these humans, they came from a world that had made them into warriors. Every instinct they had was honed for survival against impossible odds. What terrified the peaceful coalition species was just another day for them. Back in orbit, Admiral watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The plan was working. The Ravagers were confused, unable to adapt to an enemy that kept changing tactics. Captain Menu's Shadow of Terra was running hit-and-run attacks on Ravager support ships, appearing from nowhere to deliver devastating strikes before vanishing again. Had modified the Shadow's weapons to exploit the vulnerabilities had identified. Superheated plasma rounds cooked Ravager ships from the inside. Specialized missiles delivered chemical payloads that stopped their regeneration. The enemy was dying faster than they could adapt. But knew this was just the beginning. The main Ravager fleet hadn't arrived yet. This was just their advance force. The real battle was still to come, and when it did, humanity would need every advantage they could get. She opened a channel to Admiral back on Mars. "Ma'am, first phase is complete. We've secured evacuation corridors and established defensive positions. But we're going to need everything for Phase 2. The Ravagers are bringing their main force." Response was immediate. "Already on the way. Hold the line, show them what can do." The Ravager main fleet arrived 3 days later, and it blotted out the stars. Thousands of bioships, some the size of small moons, emerged from the dark spaces between worlds. They moved with terrible purpose toward the system, ready to finish what their advance forces had started. They expected to find broken defenders and easy prey. Instead, they found humanity waiting for them. Earth's response fleet had been growing steadily over 72 hours. Every combat-capable vessel from Mars, Luna, and the outer colonies had made the journey. Battle carriers, destroyers, frigates, and hundreds of smaller craft formed a defensive wall between the Ravagers and the worlds. At the center of this formation was the dreadnought Indomitable, and on its bridge stood Fleet Admiral. She watched the enemy fleet approach on the holographic display, her expression calm. The numbers were not in humanity's favor. For every human ship, there were 3 Ravager vessels, but numbers had never been humanity's advantage. Creativity, aggression, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit, those were what made humans dangerous. "All ships, this is, you know the plan, make them pay for every meter, show no fear. We are the defenders of the innocent today, and we do not yield." She paused, then added, "For humanity and for all those who cannot fight for themselves. Attack." The human fleet surged forward, and the Ravagers learned their first lesson about. These creatures did not wait to be attacked. They charged. Tactical doctrine was aggressive to the point of recklessness by coalition standards. Human ships dove into Ravager formations, using their superior maneuverability to create chaos. They fired at point-blank range where the enemy's numbers became a disadvantage, causing Ravager ships to hit each other in the confusion. Captain Minu's Shadow of Terra was in his element. The stealth frigate appeared behind Ravager command ships, delivered devastating strikes, and vanished before the enemy could respond. Had marked priority targets, and they eliminated them one by one. Each commander ship they destroyed left dozens of smaller vessels without coordination. In the engine room was performing miracles. He pushed the reactor beyond design specifications, giving the weapons more power and the engines more speed. Warning lights flashed all around him, but he ignored them. They could repair the ship later. Right now, they needed to survive. But the space battle was only half the fight. Down on the planets, the Ravagers were making their final push to overwhelm the remaining population centers. They poured from landing craft in endless waves, determined to consume everything before the human fleet could stop them. Colonel stood on the walls of the capital city, watching the enemy approach. His forces had been fighting nonstop for 3 days. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, and outnumbered by a terrifying margin. Behind him, millions of civilians huddled in shelters, praying that the strange aliens from Earth would somehow save them. All units, they're going to throw everything at us now. I won't lie to you. This is going to be the hardest fight of our lives, but remember why we're here. Behind us are people who cannot defend themselves. We stand between them and annihilation. We are human and we do not break. Hold the line. The Ravagers came like a living tide. Lieutenant's Mechanized Armor Division was the first to meet them. Her mech, a 10-meter-tall war machine bristling with weapons, charged into the enemy formation. The impact alone crushed dozens of Ravagers. Her squad followed, 30 mechs against thousands of bioengineered killers. They fought with controlled brutality. When ammunition ran low, they used the mechs themselves as weapons. The machine lost an arm to a Ravager's acid spray, so she beat the creature to death with the sparking stump. When her main cannon jammed, she used the mech's feet to crush everything that came close. To command, Armor Division is holding Sector 7, but we're taking heavy damage. We're not going to last much longer. Hold what you can, replied. Reinforcements are coming. Sergeant shock troops were already moving. They had been held in reserve for exactly this moment. His soldiers were the best close-quarters fighters humanity had, trained for the brutal reality of face-to-face combat. They hit the Ravager flank like a hammer, using weapons designed for maximum damage at short range. Himself fought with 2 combat knives and a sidearm. In the chaotic melee, range weapons were often useless. The fighting became personal, desperate, and savage. The Ravagers learned that humans were not just dangerous at a distance. Up close, they were terrifying. 3 kilometers away, Corporal was still working. She had been firing for 6 hours straight, pausing only to change positions when the enemy tried to locate her. Her rifle was designed for precision, but she had long since stopped counting shots. She just kept finding targets and eliminating them. Through her scope, she watched the desperate battle around the city walls. She saw mech go down, the pilot ejecting just before it exploded. She saw troops surrounded but fighting their way out. She saw Colonel personally leading a counterattack to retake a breached section of wall. And she kept firing. Every shot was perfect. Every target was eliminated. She was one soldier among thousands, but she would do her part until her last breath or her last bullet, whichever came first. The battle raged for 12 hours. The human forces bent but did not break. They fought with a ferocity that shocked both their allies and their Ravager enemies. When positions became untenable, they retreated in good order and established new defensive lines. When they had an advantage, they pressed it ruthlessly. In orbit, the space battle had devolved into a grinding, slugging match. Admiral's fleet had destroyed hundreds of Ravager ships, but the enemy still had the numbers. Human vessels were taking critical damage. The Indomitable itself had lost 2 main engines and half its weapons. But they had achieved something crucial. The Ravager fleet was locked in battle with them, unable to reinforce their ground forces. Every minute the humans held in space was another minute for civilians to evacuate. Received a priority transmission from one of her destroyer captains. "Admiral, we've lost main power. We're drifting. The Ravagers are closing in. Can you restore power?" "Negative. Reactor is destroyed. We have maybe 10 minutes before they board us." Made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Set your ship on a collision course with the nearest Ravager command vessel. All hands to escape pods. Make your death count. There was a pause then. "Understood, Admiral, it's been an honor." The destroyer's crew evacuated while their ship, guided by its dying AI, accelerated toward a Ravager bioship twice its size. The impact was catastrophic. Both vessels were destroyed in a fireball that lit up the battle space, but the explosion took out 3 other Ravager ships that had been too close. It was a terrible trade, but it was effective. Other human captains with disabled ships began making the same choice. They turned their vessels into weapons, selling their lives to thin the enemy ranks. On the ground, Colonel received word that the last civilian transport had lifted off. Every who could be saved was either in space or in fortified shelters. His mission was complete. Now all that remained was survival. All forces begin falling back to the final defensive line. We've done our job. Now we live through this. But the Ravagers weren't done. They sensed weakness and pressed harder. Forces retreated slowly, making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. Surviving mechs formed the rear guard, their weapons firing until they overheated. Troops used every trick they knew to slow the pursuit. Provided cover fire, her shots picking off Ravager commanders to create confusion. She had fired over 300 rounds, and not a single shot had missed. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, her mind focused on one thing: keeping her people alive. As the sun set on the battlefield, both sides were exhausted. The humans had held, but barely. The Ravagers had taken staggering losses, but were still a threat. In orbit, the space battle had reached a stalemate, with both fleets bloodied and desperate. It was in this moment, with humanity pushed to its absolute limit, that Director's Special Operations team made their move. While everyone else fought and died to hold the line, they would strike at the heart of the enemy and end this war once and for all. Director had not spent the last 3 days on any command ship or battlefield. While admirals directed fleets and colonels led armies, she and her hand-picked team of special operations agents had been hunting. They were looking for the brain behind the Ravager swarm, the central intelligence that coordinated billions of bioengineered killers across multiple star systems. Her team consisted of 3 of humanity's most capable covert operatives, was a systems specialist who could decrypt alien code faster than their own programmers, was a weapons expert and combat engineer who could turn anything into a tool or a bomb, was a scout with almost supernatural spatial awareness, able to navigate impossible terrain using instinct and training. They had infiltrated a massive Ravager hive ship that hung at the edge of the battle space. The ship was over 50 kilometers long, a living nightmare of organic architecture and biological systems. The environment inside would kill most species within minutes. The atmosphere was toxic. The temperature fluctuated between freezing and boiling. Gravity shifted unpredictably. The walls themselves occasionally tried to digest anything that touched them. For humans from Earth, it was just another hostile environment to overcome. Led her team through passages that pulsed with alien life. They wore sealed suits with independent air supplies, but even through the protection, they could feel the wrongness of this place. The ship was aware of them, trying to trap them with closing corridors and attacking them with defense organisms that grew from the walls. Handled the biological threats with chemical compounds derived from Earth plants and animals. Bleach, capsaicin, alcohol, simple substances that turned out to be devastating to the Ravager organisms. When defense creatures emerged from the walls, He sprayed them with solutions that caused their flesh to dissolve. The ship learned to stop sending defenders after the third attempt. Worked as they moved, analyzing the ship's neural network through sensors attached to the walls. The Ravager ships were all connected, sharing information across vast distances. But there was a central node somewhere, a nexus point where all the data converged. She was tracking its location through the data flows, following the information upstream to its source. Navigated them through the maze, always finding the path forward even when sensors failed. He relied on intuition built from years of training in Earth's most hostile environments. He had survived deserts, jungles, Arctic wastelands, and deep oceans. This alien ship was just another challenge to overcome. They moved deeper into the vessel, bypassing security systems and avoiding patrol organisms. The ship was largely automated, with most of its mass dedicated to weapons and engines. The actual intelligence running everything was concentrated in a small area at the ship's core. After 14 hours of infiltration, they found it. The Nexus was housed in a chamber at the heart of the Hive ship, protected by layers of biological armor and defense systems. It looked like a massive brain, if a brain could be the size of a building and glow with internal light. Cables and nerve clusters connected it to every part of the ship, and through quantum links, to every other Ravager vessel. Immediately began analyzing its structure. What she found was both fascinating and terrible. The Nexus was not a natural organism. It was artificial, created by an unknown species and abandoned long ago. It was following programming that had become corrupted over thousands of years. The original purpose was lost, replaced by a simple directive: consume all biological matter, grow, expand, repeat forever. "It's not evil," said quietly. "It doesn't understand what it's doing. It's just following broken orders." Studied the Nexus through her helmet's display. "Can we shut it down?" "I can destroy it. That would kill all the Ravagers immediately. Or," hesitated, "I could try to reprogram it, fix the corruption, give it new directives." Checked his weapon. "How long would that take?" "Hours, maybe a day. And we'd have to defend this position while I work. Every Ravager in this ship will know we're here once I start." Was already scouting the chamber's entrances. "There are 6 access points. I can seal 4 of them, but we'll have to hold the other 2. It's going to get loud." Made the decision that would define the entire operation. Humanity could take the easy path and destroy the Nexus, killing every Ravager instantly. Or they could try for something better, something that reflected humanity's greatest quality: the belief that even enemies deserved a chance at redemption. "We try to save them," said. "Start the reprogramming. Everyone else prepare for contact. They're going to throw everything at us." Connected her portable computer to the Nexus using interfaces that fabricated on the spot. The moment she breached the system, alarms sounded throughout the Hive ship. The Nexus knew it was being invaded and called for help. Sealed 4 of the 6 entrances using explosive charges that collapsed the passages. That left 2 corridors, each one wide enough for dozens of Ravager organisms to pour through. He set up defensive positions, using whatever materials were available to create cover and kill zones. Distributed weapons and ammunition. They had brought enough firepower for a small war, and they were going to need all of it. He also deployed automated turrets that would provide covering fire when things got desperate. The first wave hit them 5 minutes later. Ravager soldiers, bioengineered killing machines, flooded into the chamber. They were different from the ones fighting in space and on the planets. These were designed for ship defense, faster and more aggressive, with acid weapons and armored carapaces. Fired her rifle in controlled bursts, each shot carefully aimed to hit vital spots. Used grenades to create, forcing the enemy to bunch up where the automated turrets could cut them down. Moved between positions, always appearing where he was needed most, his accuracy and timing perfect. They held for an hour, then 2. The Ravagers kept coming, each wave stronger than the last. The defense organisms learned from each attack, adapting their tactics, but humans adapted faster. When the enemy started using the walls to flank them, deployed chemical barriers that melted anything that tried to pass through. When they began using acid weapons more effectively, repositioned the team to minimize exposure. Worked through it all, her fingers flying across her keyboard while chaos erupted around her. The Nexus system was incredibly complex, layers upon layers of corrupted code that had been accumulating for. She had to carefully unravel it without destroying the core intelligence. "I've found the primary corruption," she announced after 3 hours. The original creators programmed it to consume organic matter for fuel during long voyages. That directive became dominant when the system was damaged. Everything else got. "Can you fix it?" asked, reloading her weapon between bursts of fire. "Yes, but I need time. The Nexus is fighting me. It doesn't understand that I'm trying to help." Lobbed another grenade down the corridor. "Work faster. We're running low on ammunition." The battle intensified. The Ravagers were throwing everything at them now, sensing that something critical was happening. Took a hit to her shoulder, the armor absorbing most of the damage but leaving her arm numb. Was bleeding from a dozen small wounds. Automated turrets were beginning to fail, their power cells depleted. But they held. Every meter of ground was defended with desperate determination. When ammunition ran low, they used the environment itself, collapsing ceiling sections onto enemies, redirecting toxic vents to create barriers, even using pieces of destroyed Ravager organisms as improvised weapons. Was deep in the code now, her mind fully focused on the task. She could see the original programming, beautiful and elegant, buried under layers of corruption. The creators had made something wonderful, a guardian intelligence meant to protect biological life during long space voyages. The Ravagers were supposed to be a defensive force, not a consuming plague. She began rebuilding the core directives: protect life, serve sentient beings, never harm the innocent, simple rules that would override the corrupted consume directive. In orbit, Admiral noticed the Ravagers starting to fight with less coordination. Their attacks became hesitant, confused. Some ships broke formation entirely, as if receiving conflicting orders. On the ground, Colonel's exhausted forces saw the enemy's assault falter. The Ravagers were pulling back, not in retreat but in confusion. They stopped mid-attack, their hive minds suddenly uncertain. In the Nexus chamber, entered the final command sequence. The massive brain structure pulsed with light as new programming the corruption of ages. The Nexus fought her for one last moment, then suddenly accepted the changes. The light shifted from angry red to calm blue. "It's done," said, her voice exhausted. "The Nexus has accepted the new directives. The Ravagers are no longer hostile." As if to prove her words, the Ravager soldiers in the chamber stopped attacking. They stood motionless, confused as their core programming shifted. Then slowly, they retreated back into the corridors. Lowered her weapon, hardly daring to believe it. Did we just win? Checked the corridors. They're leaving, all of them. Sat down heavily, his legs finally giving out from exhaustion. We actually did it. We saved them. Across the battle space, every Ravager vessel ceased hostilities. They began withdrawing from space, heading back toward the dark regions where they had originated. The war was over, not through destruction but through redemption. The humans had achieved something the galaxy thought impossible. They had shown mercy to an enemy that had shown none, and in doing so, they had proven that Earth's warriors were defined not just by their ability to fight, but by their wisdom in choosing when not to. The silence that followed the end of hostilities was almost louder than the battle had been. For 14 hours, the system had been filled with weapons fire, explosions, and the screams of dying ships. Now there was only the quiet hum of surviving vessels and the collective exhale of billions of beings who had thought they were about to die. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral stood motionless, staring at the tactical display. The Ravager fleet was withdrawing in perfect order, their ships moving away from the battle space without a single shot being fired. Her communications officer kept looking at her, waiting for orders, but she had none to give. They had won, but she still couldn't quite believe it. "Ma'am," the officer finally said, "Admiral is requesting a secure channel from Mars Command." Accepted the call, appeared on the screen, and for the first time since had known her, the older woman was smiling. "You did it, all of you, the entire fleet. I don't have words." "Director's team did the impossible," replied. "We just held the line long enough for them to work. How many ships did we lose?" The smile faded slightly. 37 vessels destroyed, 52 more damaged beyond immediate repair. Casualties are still being counted, but preliminary reports suggest over 8,000 dead, 20,000 wounded. The numbers hit hard. 8,000 people who had left Earth expecting to help strangers and would never return home. She thought about the destroyer captain who had set his ship on a collision course, about all the others who had made similar sacrifices. They deserved better than to die this far from home. "They died protecting the innocent," said gently. "There is no better death for a warrior, and they won. Not just the battle, but the war. The Ravagers are no longer a threat to anyone." On the surface of the second planet, Colonel walked through his defensive positions. His soldiers were collapsed wherever they had been standing when the Ravagers. They were too exhausted to celebrate, too numb to process what had happened. They had fought for 3 days straight, held impossible positions, and somehow survived. Lieutenant was sitting on the ground next to her destroyed mech, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. When approached, she tried to stand, but he waved her down. "Stay seated, Lieutenant. You've earned it." "Did we win, sir?" she asked. "I mean really win, or is this just a pause before they come back?" "We won. The Special Operations Team fixed whatever was controlling them. The Ravagers are withdrawing from all Coalition space. It's over." Let out a long breath and then, unexpectedly, started laughing. It was the slightly hysterical laugh of someone who had been certain they were going to die. "We saved an alien species on our first mission off Earth. That's insane." Allowed himself a small smile. "That's humanity." Sergeant was gathering his shock troops, counting heads and treating injuries. He had lost 32 soldiers from his original company of 150. Good people, brave people who had followed him into hell because they believed in the mission. He would remember every name, every face, for the rest of his life. 3 kilometers away, Corporal was still in her sniper position. She had fired 473 shots during the battle, 473 kills. Her rifle was too hot to touch, and her shoulder was bruised from the recoil. She finally allowed herself to relax, putting the weapon down and closing her eyes. "You can come down now," her spotter said over the radio. "It's over." "I know," replied. "I just need a minute." In the Ravager Hive's ship, Director and her team were being escorted out by the very organisms that had tried to kill them hours earlier. The Ravagers moved carefully around the humans, almost reverently. The Nexus had understood what had done and had communicated it to every connected organism. These humans had saved them from endless torment. Was exhausted but satisfied. She had not just defeated an enemy, she had healed one. The Ravagers could now choose their own path, freed from corrupted programming that had driven them to commit atrocities. It was the best possible outcome. Carried the team's equipment, his body running on pure willpower. Navigated them out of the ship, his instincts still sharp despite his wounds. When they finally reached their extraction point and saw the human shuttle waiting for them, they allowed themselves to feel relief. "Good work, team," said as they boarded. "You just changed galactic history." The people began emerging from their shelters as word spread that the danger had passed. They saw human soldiers standing guard, exhausted but still vigilant. They saw human medics treating the wounded, both and human without distinction. They saw human engineers already working to repair damaged infrastructure. Stood in the ruins of his capital city, watching these strange aliens from a death world. They had arrived when no one else would help. They had fought when victory seemed impossible. They had shown mercy when destruction would have been easier. He understood now why they called themselves human. It was not just a species name. It was a statement of values. He approached Commander, who had landed with relief forces. "I want to thank you, on behalf of all people. You saved us when no one else would." Looked uncomfortable with the praise. "We did what needed to be done. Anyone would have helped if they could." "No," said firmly. "The Coalition discussed helping for weeks while you acted within days. You risked everything for people you had never met. That is not common, even in our long galactic history. That is special." Over the next week, human forces worked alongside civilians to begin the recovery process. The damage was extensive but not irreparable. 2 worlds had been completely destroyed, but the remaining 3 could be saved. Refugee camps were established. Supply lines were set up. Medical facilities treated thousands of wounded. The Galactic Coalition finally sent representatives, arriving in massive diplomatic vessels that were impressive but useless. They found the battle already won and humans working side by side with the species they had saved. The Coalition observers were shocked by how quickly humans had mobilized, how effectively they had fought, and most importantly, by their decision to save the Ravagers rather than destroy them. Admiral traveled to meet with Coalition leadership. The meeting took place in a temporary structure built by human engineers, since the original government buildings had been destroyed. She wore her full dress uniform, her medals from decades of Earth service displayed prominently. The Coalition representatives were a mix of species, all of them peaceful, all of them used to resolving conflicts through committees and discussion. They looked at with a mixture of respect and fear. She represented something they had not encountered in over 1,000 years, a warrior culture that was still rising, still expanding, still hungry to prove itself. "Admiral," the head diplomat began, "on behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I want to express our gratitude for your species' intervention. You saved the people when we could not." "You're welcome," replied simply, "though I would point out that you could have helped. You chose not to act quickly enough." The diplomat looked uncomfortable. "We have procedures, treaties, laws that govern military intervention. We cannot simply deploy forces without proper authorization and debate." "While you were debating, people were dying," said, her voice hard. "Humanity will always choose action over procedure when innocent lives are at stake. Remember that." The meeting continued for hours, with Coalition representatives trying to understand these new arrivals. They wanted to know about Earth, about human capabilities, about their intentions. Answered honestly. Humanity was not interested in conquest or domination. They wanted to be part of the galactic community, but they would not stand by while others suffered. "We would like to formally invite Earth to join the Galactic Coalition," the head diplomat finally said. "Not just as members, but as protectors. We need species like yours, those willing and able to defend the innocent." Considered this. It was what Earth had wanted for decades, recognition and acceptance, but she needed to be clear about humanity's terms. "We will join, but understand this. We will not ask permission to defend others. We will not wait for committee approval while people die. If we see a threat, we will act. Can you accept that?" The Coalition representatives exchanged glances. They were not used to such directness, but they had seen what humanity could do, and they knew they needed that capability on their side. "We can accept those terms." Back on Earth, news of humanity's first contact with alien life dominated every media channel. People celebrated in the streets. They had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew they were not, and better yet, they had made a difference. Humanity had proven itself not just capable but worthy. In the system, human forces began preparing to leave. The immediate crisis was over. Civilian contractors would stay to help with rebuilding, but the military forces needed to return home. There would be debriefings, analysis, medals, and memorials for the fallen. Captain Minu stood on the bridge of the Shadow of Terra one last time before departure, was at her station, was in engineering, and was in the medical bay. They had started this journey as Earth's first contact team. They were leaving as heroes, though none of them felt like heroes. They had just done their job. "Set course for home," Minu ordered. "Let's go back to Earth." As the human fleet prepared to depart, the people lined up to say goodbye. They had prepared gifts, written messages, and offered thanks in every way they could. The humans were embarrassed by the attention but accepted it graciously. They had not fought for gratitude, but it was nice to be appreciated. Presented Admiral with a crystal that contained the recorded history of the battle. "So you will never forget what you did here. So your people will know that their sacrifices mattered." Accepted the crystal with a formal bow. "We will remember, and if you ever need help again, humanity will answer." The human fleet departed the system 3 days after the battle ended, leaving behind a changed galaxy. The Galactic Coalition had a new member, one that would reshape their understanding of strength, courage, and compassion. The Ravagers had been given a second chance, freed from corruption to find their own path. And humanity had stepped from the shadows into the light, revealing themselves not as conquerors but as protectors. Back on Earth, Admiral addressed the entire planet via global broadcast. "Today, humanity took its place among the stars. We answered a call for help from strangers and saved an entire civilization. We faced an enemy that had defeated everyone else and found a way to win without destruction. We proved that strength and compassion are not opposites but partners. We are forged by our harsh home into the defenders the galaxy needs, and we have only just begun." As her words echoed across Earth and beyond, every human felt it: pride, purpose, and the knowledge that they were part of something greater. They were no longer alone in the universe. They were humanity, and they had shown the galaxy what that meant. When darkness threatened the innocent, when hope seemed lost, when others could not or would not act, humanity would rise. They would fight. They would protect. They would never surrender. They were, and the galaxy would never be the same.